Welcome to the Happily Different podcast, where we unpack the interesting and unorthodox ways people approach their businesses and their lives. The mission of this show is to learn as much as we can from people who weren't afraid to go their own way. My name is Ryan Jaskowitz, and I'm your host, as well as CEO of 12-5 Capital, a non-bank finance company helping companies accelerate the progress they are trying to make in their businesses and in their lives. Today's guest is the CEO of Spaulding Clinical, a clinical trials company based outside of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. She started out as, I believe, director of clinical operations, where she worked her way up to CEO. Prior to joining the company, she attended Marquette University, where she obtained a degree in nursing. She's an awesome mom to 6 kids and is an active member of the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. Cassandra Erato, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on, Ryan.
And it's been a while, so Cassandra and I know each other. Do you prefer Cassandra or Cassie?
Cassie is good.
Cassie. Okay, so I'm going to use Cassie for the rest of the show. I used your proper name at least. You know, I have 3 kids myself, and I only call them by their full names. There's plenty of like nicknames they can have, but I feel like you should at least acknowledge the full name, at least for the parents in the audience.
Yes, I did that for 4 out of 6 of my kids.
Oh, really?
Full names.
Yeah.
Nicknames on
2. Nicknames on 2. There you go. Okay. So in doing some research on you, full disclosure, I've known Cassie a while. We work together in a different capacity. But in doing some research on you, on what I don't know is whether you grew up in the Milwaukee area for your whole life. Are you from Wisconsin originally?
Yes. Yep. Grew up Milwaukee area.
And Milwaukee area the whole time? Okay.
Yeah.
Milwaukeean through and through. So what's your favorite beer? I mean, it's got to be a Milwaukee one, right?
Well, there's a local brewery, Third Space. Third Space Happy Place is my favorite one.
Third Space Happy Place. All right, cool. I'll have to try that out. I've not had. How many siblings do you have?
I have 5 siblings, so I come from 6.
You come from 6, you've had 6. And where do you fall in the order?
I'm second oldest.
Second oldest. Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm the oldest in my family, but they do say the second oldest is the hardest worker. So it's clear in your case as well.
There's 2 parts to our family. There was like a first family and a second family. There were like the first 3 and the second 3. And so I grew up next to my sisters, and I was pretty much a middle child. So I'm definitely like the mediator, negotiator, keep the peace kind of person.
Oh yeah. So you
also the hardest worker.
Also the hardest worker. Let me pull the thread there though. So you had 3 siblings, and then 3. I'm assuming 3 younger ones later. How'd that all go down?
Yeah. Well, there were 6 of us over 21 years. So
holy cow.
The 4th child was born when I was in 2nd grade, so still pretty young, and then 6th grade, and then I was college for the last. So we were just all really spread out. Yeah.
Do you feel like you helped raise the smallest one, or all of them, I guess, or were you already sort of out into college? And
the one that was born when I was in 6th grade, the 5th boy, I definitely raised him.
Yeah. Are you guys close now?
Yeah, we're
That's
close.
awesome.
He's in San Francisco, so I don't see him as much, but we're definitely the closest of the siblings.
Definitely the closest. Interesting. My wife is the youngest of 4 girls. She is, I would say, I don't know what the exact difference in age would be, but maybe it's similar to that, but she is definitely closest with her oldest sister. So they are like best, kind of best friends between the siblings. So it's just weird how that all always kind of shakes out. Yes. My dad also was one of 12, and you're one of 6. I should say he is one of 12, but he had a similar situation where he was going to college and his mom was still having my grandmother was still having kids. And so there's these great pictures of him, coming home from college and holding the little baby like in his arm. And I find that fascinating. I just can't fathom it. It's like a whole different world.
Yeah.
So what do you, Milwaukee, very blue collar working class town, similar to Chicago where I'm at. What did your parents do for a living when you were growing up?
Well, my mom stayed at home with us, and my dad, he was a biomedical engineer, and he worked for Marquette Electronics in Milwaukee, and then GE Healthcare bought them out. And then he worked for Mortara Instruments. So he was like 22 years of creating 12-lead ECG devices as an engineer for those companies.
Interesting. So he was always an engineer, always designing, all that kind of stuff throughout your childhood.
Yes.
Growing up in Milwaukee, how did it shape you kind of growing up, would you say? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I definitely have my like German, Polish background. But, Milwaukee's a melting pot too. So, but just very European, definitely hard work ethic. So my dad, his family, like he came from 6, and a lot of them are in the trades and electricians. And, so my dad's dad always raised them on, like, if you're going to dig a ditch, you better be the best ditch digger so that if everyone loses their job, you're the one that keeps it. My dad just instilled that hard work ethic. So it's very like Midwest hard work ethic. My dad like took us on these long distance bike rides when we were kids and taught us perseverance and basically like pushing through those really difficult times. So, I mean, that's the biggest thing that comes to mind in terms of like what it was like in Milwaukee is I feel like all of our extended family around us, my father, my mom always taught you work hard.
It's got to be something, I don't want to paint with a broad brush, but like Midwest related, because anytime I talk to anybody, interview somebody from Chicago, Wisconsin, I just interviewed somebody from Michigan. That's always sort of the answer is work ethic. And I think it's that immigrant nature, like you mentioned, German, Polish. I come from a very Polish family in Bay City, Michigan. Everyone came there, very blue collar jobs. Chicago's the same way. It's just all that. So it's interesting. I wonder as I start interviewing people around the United States, if that will be the same answer as to how it shaped them. Is that a stock answer, I wonder, or is that something true to us in the Midwest? It feels true to me. It feels true. And knowing you and knowing your family a little bit, it definitely rings true. I'm curious how that'll play out as I interview people around the U.S. Where did you guys go on these bike rides? Were they in Wisconsin, or did you guys travel for them?
When I was 7, we did like our first longer ride from like West Bend to South Milwaukee, which was about 50 miles. And then when I was 9, we did our first ride to Chicago. So we started Milwaukee Lakefront and rode the trail all the way down to Chicago Lakefront. That's
fun. That's pretty wild.
Yeah, my longest ride, we rode from Milwaukee Lakefront down to southern Illinois to Peoria. That was a 3-day ride.
You went all the way to Peoria?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Where did you guys stop along the way? Do you remember?
I don't remember the cities we stopped in. But I remember like a couple of the trails were just beautiful, and we stopped at a water park at one point. My dad would have us start at like 5 a.m. so that we would beat the heat, because we would be doing this in like July, and he would be telling us at like 11 a.m., you guys, we just have 20 more miles and I'm going to take you to this water park that's up ahead. And so he would always give us these carrots, and we would stop at fun places. I think we stopped at like a carnival along the way too.
That's awesome. How old were you when you did that last ride down in Peoria?
I think like 11.
And how many so was it just your dad and the 3 kids at the time?
It was just my dad, myself, and my older sister, because my younger one right below me, when we started the rides to Chicago, she was like too young to do it. And I think like just like still like a little too young by the time we did our last ones.
Right. Right. What did mom think of these rides? Did she like them? Think he was crazy?
She was okay. Like she was always super nervous. She would be like, I remember like when we rode into Chicago, I got in a really bad accident. I like crashed into another biker on the lakefront, like at the end of our ride. And I had this huge welt on my forehead. And my mom comes to pick us up and she's like, oh my God.
Thank God that was before FaceTime, right?
Yeah.
That would have been way worse for her. Way worse. I mean, think about that. Yeah. Taking your kids down from Milwaukee to Chicago is crazy enough. But if I'm doing my fast math correctly, this is pre-cell phone, I have to guess. Pre-cell phone being common enough to throw on a bike.
Yep. Yeah, we definitely did not have a cell phone.
It's definitely something I would do with my kids, and my wife would say, you're nuts. I have this like goal to run in all 50 states. And I have this vision of like renting an RV, bringing the kids along, bringing my wife along, obviously, and, go state by state, and I run miles throughout the state or run across the United States or something like that. And nobody's in for it. I'm the only one that's in for it right now. So.
Oh my gosh. I met a speaker, or I had a speaker, and he was presenting, and he was talking about, he took a hiatus from corporate world and like went into his own business, and he took his son to Japan, and they biked from like the east to the west coast, and his son was young. And so it was same kind of thing. And I was like, that was the number one most like formative experience for me as a kid. Because by the time I got to college or even through high school, it was like you meet obstacles and you meet hardships, and you're not as afraid. You have that confidence in being able to do that. No matter what it is, whether it's something biking or something else.
Yeah.
You've got to go through something hard.
Right. But what I like about what you just said is, and as people know on this show, or they will know as they listen to it, I run a lot. Something about endurance sports, I think, prepares people for doing hard things alone, basically. Effectively, there's no one else you can really lean on. I mean, on a bike ride like that, your dad could help you, your sister could help you. You have a little bit of company, but really, you have to pedal those pedals, and you got to keep going and keep moving. Same thing with running. Do you do any more? Do you still do endurance sports of any sort in your life now, other than just being a mom to 6 kids?
I don't. I have my Peloton bike, and I ride my Peloton.
There you go.
I haven't done anything like major, like marathon or anything like that. I feel like I'm in an endurance sport in the business every day right now. So all of my mental fortitude is really taken up by that.
Yeah. I mean, I hear that. My business is really getting in the way of my endurance sports. I always say my business hobby is getting in the way of my endurance life. So, I absolutely your mom
need my daily workouts. I definitely need my daily workouts to help me through that, but I've got to make it like an efficient 30 minutes, and that's it.
Right. Well, and that's the nice thing about Peloton. So as much as I'm a runner, outside most of the time, we have the tread and the bike in the basement, and there's just no excuse then, and there's just something about it that clicks, and it's like, all right, this works. My wife loves it as well. She's down there every single day. So it's interesting how that has moved to a lot more people. Before, cycling and running and things like that weren't as popular before things like Peloton. Last on cycling, does your dad still cycle?
He does, like a little bit. Like we actually did a ride to Chicago like 5 years ago with my 2 oldest, and then like a couple of the cousins.
Oh, cool.
So he did it like with the grandkids and my sister and I, and we did it again.
Oh man, that must have been a blast. Did you guys like spend the weekend in Chicago or anything?
Yeah, we we got down there, and then the rest of everybody met us, and we went to Navy Pier for the night, and that was like,
fun.
Yeah, their incentive. So it was good.
Cool. That's a good deal. I love it. Okay. So you're a mom to 6 kids and a CEO, obviously, lots on your plate. Before we move on to Spaulding Clinical itself, what has that been like? Because obviously you just talked about your mom to 6 kids. By the way, does anybody ever bring up the fact that you guys keep doing 6s of everything? Because I think you said your grandparents had 6 kids,
Yeah.
your dad being one of them. Is there any more 6s out there I don't know about?
No.
You're the only one. So it's on somebody from each generation to pass that on, I guess.
Yes.
Is the gist? All right. So next generation, one of them's got to look forward to it. So obviously a lot on your plate. What's I don't know, what's an insight you've had along this journey relating to being a parent and running a large company? I mean, I know I have some thoughts myself, but as a mom and obviously, unfortunately, in our world, that most of the responsibility, whether consciously or subconsciously, defaults to the mom. And now you're a CEO. I don't know. I'm kind of asking a long-winded question here, but just looking for some insights because it's fascinating to me.
Well, it's been an ongoing struggle and question. Like, I'm very challenged by like, how do I make this work, or how can I make this work? And to me, it's just like a something I can conquer. And a couple of like the biggest things have been support systems. My younger sister, the fourth, she was like 23 when I was like really in the mix of having kids. And so she came on as our full-time nanny for like 7 years. And that was amazing to have a family member, like they're caring for your children, like they love them as much as you do, or to just have someone stable. Like that's huge, because I've been through periods where we didn't have her, and you're bringing on different nannies, interviewing them, and like that's so stressful. But when it's all working well at home, you got the nanny support, housekeeping support, like as much support as we've been able to afford to hire along the way. That's key. But like one of my struggles or takeaways is like when we're starting out and I'm in that director of operations role and I'm not at that CEO role, and I'm making sacrifices to try to build the business and to try to excel in my career, we might not necessarily have the income to bring on that support. And I always feel that for women in their 20s going through that, or even, men, if they're the stay at home in that situation. But like, it's when you're going into double income earners and have to bring on the support at home, there's an income level point where that works, and below it, it's a little scary. So it's been a big takeaway for me was like, how do you even make that work for people in their 20s as they're developing their careers? And we're a little odd because we started having kids when we were 23 years old. So that's rough. But by the time we were in our 30s, it all started.
Well, you started a little earlier and I would say, I think you and I are around this. I'm 38. I think we're around the same age-ish. I don't know, even with my current friends, like we were earlier than most of them. You look at the generation now, that's all sort of waiting until 30, 31, 32 to start that process of starting a family, if that's what somebody wants. So maybe they are missing that period that we kind of worked through. Yeah. I had none of the burden you had, but working through that time, I do know that it was important to me to, I don't know why the light went off, but the light went off of like, I need to make some really hard rules and boundaries relating to my business and how that affects my family. Because for some reason for me, I have a decent sized family. My wife's got a big family. But for some reason, for me, it was very clear that like this little circle where all these people, like, my wife and my 3 kids, where they land in, like, that's the most important thing to me, right? That little circle. And it this sounds easy, but it's not. And I think you probably know that, which is setting up those boundaries is very difficult at 20 some odd years old when you're trying to do what you talked about, which is build the business, network, get your name out there as your own person, make people think you know what you're talking about when you really don't, because I didn't. And so for me, it was about creating these boundaries and hoping that by sticking with them, they would somehow pay off in the long run, because you've got these little, basically little balls of skin that these kids are, right? And you're molding them. They're constantly recording. And in my opinion, that's the most important time are those early years, right? It's like an inverse of how it should be.
Yeah.
You don't have the income and the things like that to support getting somebody to mow the lawn or getting a nanny or getting somebody to clean the house. Because to me, I would rather just spend all of my time with them, just sitting together or playing or whatever it is. I don't want to have to focus on the other things if you can afford that. But like you said, that's such a difficult thing. So were boundaries a big thing for you? Is that something you caught on to early? Was that something that kind of came later in life? Any thoughts on sort of the boundaries between business and your family?
A little bit. I mean, I thought of it the way I looked at it was, these all are very close together. So I need to find a way for it to work all together. So work, home, and school, I set up in like a 5-mile radius of each other during the earliest times. Right. And then there were periods where we set up a daycare within work so that I could go like visit the babies while I was working. So I always tried to overlap it a lot so that I could kind of do both at the same time. But there are times that doesn't make sense to do. If you're doing yard work and you can't afford to bring in someone to do that, like get the kids out doing that with you. So there were areas where like I tried to just do both at the same time. And then there were clear areas where like on my walk home from work, that transition was like 2 minutes. And I'm like, okay, I need to like do a couple more laps around the block to transition into a headspace where I can like really be present.
Right. Oh my gosh. I totally know that, mainly because of, at least you had the 2-minute walk, right? Like everyone's working from home now. We were a remote work company a couple of years prior to the pandemic, and there's all these benefits to that, but there's no break. There's no shift from upstairs in the office here to downstairs into the kitchen. There's no mental break. And so I'm trying to put walks in between there where I'm like, all right, everybody, I see you, but it's going to be 15 minutes. I'm going to go 1 mile walk and I'll be back. It'll all be good. It'll be my commute. But I'm fascinated by that, because like there is this blending of these things. I'm seeing this weird thing with my kids. Every generation is going to find a reason to hate their parents, right? So I'm sure there'll be something your kids don't like about you and something they don't like about me, but which are all unfounded. I'm learning, because it's like, there's the things I hated my parents about, but the thing that my kids think is they think, because I work from home a lot, that all I do is work all the time. Even though I work typical hours, I don't work late into the evenings. I don't work, I start a little early, but they're at school, but they come home and they're around and all they're seeing is working. Yeah. Right. They come in. Hey, will you play? I'm like, sorry, I can't play. I got to work. This is the work time. And they understand physical separation more. When I go to school, I'm at school. When I, go to the park, I'm at the park. And it dawned on me that like, oh my gosh, even though they have this thing that I would have killed for as a kid, where my parents being around all the time would have been awesome. Like seeing them more, not having them go on work trips and all that kind of stuff. So I'm home all the time, but they're going to perceive it as all my dad did was work. Yeah. And I'm just fascinated as to how like that's such a hard deal for them to understand.
That's so true. I think like my kids said that way more like during 2020 when we were home all the time. It was like, hey, can you play? And it was always, you're working all the time. I can't see you. It's all the time. And it's totally that, because you're like in the space and there's not a physical barrier.
There's not a physical barrier. And so now, 15 years from now, all of our kids are going to be in therapy complaining to their therapist that my dad worked and my mom worked all the time. Meanwhile, you and I are sitting back going, I was there all the time for you. I was here every time. So pretty wild. Yeah, obviously being a mom of 6 kids and a CEO. I don't know a ton about your industry. I'm just curious, and we can not pull on this thread if there's nothing there, but what's it like being a female CEO in your space? Is it predominantly male oriented?
No, it's actually, we work with a lot of biotech companies and pharma companies in mainly San Diego, San Francisco, Boston, New Jersey, South Carolina. And in all of those companies, I've worked with a lot of women in the leadership teams, as well as like the project management teams. So in Wisconsin, it's pretty like rare, but with the companies we're working with, I think it's appreciated and seen as a positive.
Yeah. It's awesome. I'm wondering if I mean, the hope would be that narrative is changing. That's why I'm asking the question, hoping that the answer is, yeah, no, actually it's not. I'm not getting, because you read stories about 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and it wasn't the answer you just gave. It was much, much, much harder. So obviously people paved the way and things seem to be changing a little bit there. So, okay. So that's a good transition to shifting to Spaulding Clinical. So for the benefit of our listeners who probably have zero idea what you guys do, can you give a brief understanding of what Spaulding Clinical does?
Yes. So we do contracted clinical research for pharmaceutical companies. Every drug that wants to go on the US market has to go through 3 phases of testing before it's approved to market. And the first phase is what we do. And that's all for safety, looking for side effects. And then also like the drug profile, the pharmacokinetic profile. So how fast it's moving through your system. Does it interact with food? Basically everything you see on a package insert when you pick up your prescription from the pharmacy, we study and test. So it's all in human volunteers too. So we have a building that was a former hospital. We have 200 hospital beds. So we typically have about 100 people in house at once in various different trials. And we basically administer the product and then do a lot of blood draws to watch that rise and fall of the product in the blood, and then collect all the data, safety data throughout the test. And it's usually anywhere from a 2-day stay that a volunteer is with us to the average is about 10 days. And then we do studies as long as like 45 to 50 days are really long ones.
That's wild. And they stay there at the facility?
Yes. Yep. Overnight. We check in and it's basically, we're creating an extremely controlled environment. So like, scientific method, you're not introducing any outside interference with, if you woke up and drank 5 cups of coffee and that accelerated your heart rate, we're taking that variable out so that you can see it's not coming from the drug.
If you're having people there for, 45 days at a time, I mean, it's like you're running a hospital or a hotel and you kind of just all the things that go in with that, I would think. So you just talked about it's a former hospital. Is that a common thing in your space for a clinical trials company to find a hospital to buy? Like, how did that all come about?
No, that's not very common. A lot of units are kind of purpose built, but they might be set more up like dormitories almost. They'll have like central medical areas, and then they'll have more like sleeping rooms. There are quite a few phase 1 units set up within hospitals throughout the country, but that's more of like academic centers. So an academic research area might have some hospital beds, like 6 beds or 12 beds that they're using for studies. So ours is pretty unique.
Oh, okay.
And it came about because my dad, who started the company, he was driving by this hospital that had just been vacated, and he was going to phase 1 units like every day, because his last position, he was a VP of sales, and he was going around the world selling telemetry systems to phase 1 units like ours. So he was seeing these units all the time, and he was like, I can do this better. I can build this better. And then he was driving by this hospital every day, and he was like, oh my gosh, that's the spot. I can do this.
Wait. Okay. So I don't think I knew this part. I knew you guys bought a hospital. What I didn't understand was I thought the company was already started before that. So you're telling me he's selling these telemetry units to other phase 1s, driving by, and that's the thing that, because I was going to say, what started Spaulding? Like, how did it get started? And so that is basically the story, right? Like, he drives by this hospital and is like, oh, I should buy that.
I think he had been thinking about it before he saw the hospital. And there was major cardiologist in the industry he was talking to about like how they could do things better. And then he sees this hospital. It was all like right at the same moment. So the hospital had just happened to vacate to build a completely new center. And it was just right at that perfect moment in time. And
were you involved at that point in the company?
So this is like July. Well, let's say like May, he drives by, sees this, has this idea. July, he filed the paperwork for the LLC, and I got involved in November. So it was all like a pretty quick, short period of time. And then we moved into the building in May. So he ended up
so under a year.
Yeah. And we moved in first, like kind of leasing some space, and then they were leasing some space back from us, but it happened pretty quickly.
And then you guys ended up buying the entire building?
Yeah. I mean, that was within the year we had bought the entire building. He bought it for $1. Wow. Did you know that?
Come on. No, I did not know that. Tell me how this went down.
Well,
what's the story behind that?
It was, they were looking at, did they just mow it and turn it into real estate development? And they couldn't find a buyer. But if you kept it up, you basically took on like $1 million a year in operating expenses. And it was a community built hospital. It had been built in 1929 with subsequent additions. So the community was really upset that they were moving out of it. And I think it just provided a win-win that they could pass it on. It would go into good use, but somebody would take on those operating expenses. And it allowed them to transition, because they leased back. They had just built a beautiful new oncology center, and they didn't have one yet at the new space. So they leased that back from us for a good 2 years. So it allowed them a good transition time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just could only imagine like looking down at the purchase contract and seeing $1 as the person.
I think it was like at the time,
funny.
Like a fun thing to say, but at the same time, I know my dad was just like, so like just freaking out, because you're taking on all of that
overwhelmed
expense. And like, it's a big, like, oh my God. And the payroll.
Yeah. The true cost was not $1 million. The true cost was not $1.
No.
But to be able to go, look, I bought that thing.
Yeah, it's a fun.
I paid $2.50 for a cup of coffee today, and that building technically only cost me $1 at close. So
yeah, I heard a guy with
wild.
A similar story with a historic property in Milwaukee, huge building, and he bought it for $1, but it needed like $16 million in renovations. So.
Oh my
gosh. It kind of happens.
So it's always a good story.
Historic buildings. And we've had to put a lot into.
Yeah, that you're trying to keep around.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure that like not only just keeping it up, but developing the location. Because I'm sure while a hospital is good for what you're looking for, I'm sure there's a lot of things that you want to do within there that are far better for a phase 1 trials company than a hospital, I would imagine. And
I mean,
built on 1929 infrastructure.
Yeah. The spaces itself have actually been really easy to convert. It's like the mechanicals. You have to just keep up with the boiler and the chiller and the generator and all of those things that, that's the biggest investment moving forward with it.
Right. So I like to ask what the fork was in the road that led you to join Spaulding, but it sounded like it happened pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
How did that happen? So your dad starts it, Randy starts it, and by November you're on board. I can't imagine there was a ton of revenue coming in at that point, unless maybe there were some contracts, but I don't know.
No. I mean, he had an investment to start a founding team, and so we came on with small salaries, but my husband came on at the same time. So we had just gotten married in the last year. We just had our first child, and I was working like second shift on poison control as a nurse, but I was also getting my master's.
Oh.
And I had worked in hospital units, and it was actually like a really nice fork in the road for me, because I always wanted to go in the sciences, but I was always really interested in the why behind everything rather than like the direct patient care. I would be on the hospital floor and they'd say, okay, you need to give this vasopressin over IV. Be like, well, why? Like, tell me more about like how that affects the heart rate. It's like, you just need to learn the protocols. And I'm like, but I want to know. So it was a really great transition for me, because I got to read all of these protocols on all these different studies, and I loved it. So my husband was a firefighter and like EMT, and he was just about to get hired on with like a major city contract as a firefighter, and he made the leap over too, and working in the telemetry systems. So he actually went on like a month before I did, and then we were just all in, and we moved out from Milwaukee to West Bend, which is like 30 minutes away, but so that we could be right there. And we spent like all of our time at the building getting it ready, writing all the procedures, getting all the units ready to be operational. And we ran our first study like about 4 months after we moved into the building.
After you moved in. Okay. Interesting. So yeah, you guys were all in. I didn't know the story of you and your husband, and I think I knew you had your first child right around that time, but I had no idea that he was on board as well. I mean, that's some big life changes all at the same time.
Yes, and really putting all of your chips in one basket.
Wasn't stressful at all, right? Yes. I was just going to say that. I was going to just note on that, because the usual thing to do is have one person take the risk, the other person has a nice steady income, and you try to make it work as best you can. But yeah, throw both, jump in with 4 feet instead of both feet, I guess, at that point. Did Randy, was this sort of, as he was envisioning this, was that always sort of the plan to have you guys come on board? What's the story behind that? Because that can easily go the wrong way.
I know that like his dream was to like work with his children. So I know that was like, that he wanted that, but I don't think he knew we would all be there right away, like ready to go. And, but we were cheap labor at the time for sure.
Yeah. He was, it was child labor really at that point. How many of the siblings came on board at that same time?
3 of us, my older sister, my younger sister, and my husband. So 4 total in the family. Okay.
Wow. But again, that's, I talk to a lot. I have some family in my business. It all has its ups and downs, and I'm sure we could talk about all the ups right now, but I'm sure if we wanted to do a B-sides of this podcast, we could talk about all the downs as well and the challenges. But I also think there's just something about that trust. something about that trust there
Oh,
that you don't get everywhere else. And I feel like it's hard to put it into words, but people are always like, "Oh my gosh, you work with your family." And it's like, yeah, definitely challenging, but I know there's a level of trust that I just can't get with somebody else
oh my gosh.
outside of it.
Yes.
Do you feel the same way?
Yeah. And I felt that really strongly just in the last couple of years because I'll jump ahead like a little past pandemic. We were really struggling operationally
Okay.
because we needed like strong. I had transitioned from COO to CEO. So I had been really deep in the operation, really running it every day. And when I went into CEO, I was trying to find that operational head to help take that. And the first year it did not go well. I had hired the wrong person and it just wasn't working. And I was talking to like my business mentor and he was like, is there anybody in your family that could do this? Cause like, just don't underestimate like the trust that you have in family. And I'm like, well, I've been working with family forever, but I'm like, I guess. So my husband had just exited. He left the business like 6 years ago and he went to a different company. He had an exit from there just at this moment. So I turned to him like, hey, would you come into the business for a little bit and like run the operation?
Oh my
and
gosh.
he did. And he's been in like 7 months now. And oh my gosh, like the difference in having someone you can trust. And you can definitely find that hiring externally, finding the right person. But we needed a fast solution. And there was like an automatic, someone I could trust 100%. So it makes a huge difference.
Yeah. Trust and knows the business.
Yes. Yep.
Right. Yeah. Knows the bit. You don't have to teach it. From a cultural perspective, is that difficult having a husband and wife team? And by the way, we should start another podcast about like how the hell you guys make that work. But how is there from a cultural perspective for the rest of the team? There is other family in the team, but I'm sure there's plenty of non-family employees. Like, is that an awkward thing? Does it not come up? Or do you address it? Anything like that?
Well, at this point in time, there's none of my other family is involved with me in this business, except my dad as like a chairman.
Oh, interesting.
So in the leadership team, there's no family, which I think would make it more awkward. So when you remove that, culturally, it's been fine. If he came in and there were issues and it wasn't working well, that would have been really difficult. Yeah. But he came in and relieved so much stress from so many people so fast that everybody was just so grateful and welcoming of it. So it works fine. And then between me and him,
it's interesting. They talk
between me and him, like I love it. And he says, like, I will not leave until you're in a place that you have someone, but I do need to leave because I need to go do my own thing.
Oh, okay.
So we've told everybody along the way, like, this is temporary. But yeah, you could do a whole nother podcast on that one.
Yeah. It sounds like clear expectations, which I've found with family. And I think people are afraid to have those conversations, unfortunately, about clear expectations because because you have to talk about things like hierarchy or who is the final say on this thing versus that thing. And I just think that, those things have to be talked about. Once you talk about them, then they're on the table and you say, well, we talked about that before. This was the decision we came to. I think what most family businesses tend to do is just brush that stuff under the rug and don't ever talk about it because it feels uncomfortable and unfortunately blows up in the end. It doesn't. Whereas you just talk about these tough things early and it makes it easier. Also sounds like your husband did a really good job of, there's this guy I listened to on some podcast. He talks about the trust battery, about trust being like a battery, like on our cell phone, right? It gets sent to you with, 30% charged. And then over time you build that up and it sounds like he came in and just charged those trust batteries with all those employees really quickly so that they were like, oh, this is a good thing to have this person here. Plus, they also had the nuance of it's always been a family business, so this is not anything new.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so just transitioning a little bit, we just talked about culture a little bit, but I'm because again, this podcast is called the Happily Different Podcast. It's one of our core values at 12.5. It's about how people took different approaches towards things, and talking about your family and what the things we just talked about. I mean, you guys epitomize that idea that no, most people would maybe not make these decisions if they had another option necessarily, but you guys are actively saying, yes, we want our family involved. We want the culture to be like this. We want to stay in Milwaukee when we could probably go to one of the coasts and make, do things there. You're actively choosing these things. I'm just curious, and this will be probably a theme for the next little while for most of my interviews, because it's just really interesting to hear what people did, during this pandemic. And so you're in the healthcare field, you're doing pharmaceutical testing. I don't know if you guys were killing it, before, just slightly before 19 and 20 or whatever, but, sort of setting the scene, I've talked about with other companies that I've interviewed here, but, March hits and March of 2020 hits and basically the world stops. What did that look like for you guys? And were you CEO yet? How are you feeling?
I became CEO in February of 2020. So it was like a month later.
Oh my God.
18, 19, I was kind of acting as CEO. My dad was just there in the background, and I was telling him like, hey, like, let's do this for 2 years. We'll transition it. So I was already kind of in it, but we were ramping up our sales, and I was super focused on sales in 2018 and 19. And our sales had taken a nosedive like in 17. And I was just building it back up as fast as I could, getting our name out there, doing new marketing. And so when 2020 hit, we were in like a good upward trajectory, like doing pretty well. And then when in March, when there was the shutdown, we did have to shut down the operation for about a month. And but the majority of our clients needed to keep going whenever it was safely possible to do so. So it wasn't like we were just, the hardest part was operationally redoing everything. I mean, we just spent that entire month putting in like all of the lines on the floor for distancing and changing the bed space to distance those, and putting all of our procedures together for PPE and mask wearing and gowns and gloves, set up like COVID testing and a drive-through so that like our participants coming in could do that first. So there was a lot to do operationally, and that was the most difficult part. But one of the major fortunate things for us was we have 200 beds in 200,000 square feet. Most of our competitors have 200 beds in 100,000 square feet. So we're tons of space. So we were able to say to our customers, like, most of our competitors were reducing their capacities by 50% because they would have like a ward with 12 beds in a row, and they would have to now remove a bed in between. We always had 2 beds per room, like in a hospital room. So we're super spread out. Mm-hmm. So we were able to say, like, we don't have to reduce our capacities. So the supply and demand quickly changed in our favor. And so from a sales perspective, it was a huge booster for us. I'm
so fascinated by the accidental, like, how do I say this? Because I don't want it to sound like you didn't work hard to obviously get this, but I've talked to a lot of businesses of this accidental success. Like, it's not like Randy knew when he was buying that hospital, there's going to be a pandemic someday. let's have 200,000 square feet so we can have space. It's just funny how the universe brings you what it brings you, and whether you act on it or not is obviously key. But I mean, that month you're talking about, I think what people very quickly forget is you talked about masking and gowns and gloves. Those things weren't easy to get then. You talked about testing. You couldn't find testing anywhere. How did you guys handle the testing? Did you guys do that in-house or contract with somebody for the drive-through?
We contracted out. So we would collect on site, but then we were using a courier for the samples every day for a lab in Milwaukee. So we contracted out the analysis of the samples, and had to put that in place really quickly.
And how did that transition go in terms of you, in terms of like the success of those protocols?
It all went just fine. It went really well. I mean, of course, there was disagreements along the way. You have your chief medical or your medical director and your doctors wanting to go one way, and staff and operational staff like, hey, we got it. So there's tons of discussions on how do you make this work, and so many details to iron out that it's just exhausting mentally for everybody. Everybody was tired, but they did it really well.
Yeah. That's what I get from everybody, ourselves included. It's just everyone was tired then. So, okay. So just quickly, cause I'm taking most of your time now, and I want to get to the last few things here. Historically, you guys have been, clinical trials for pharmaceutical companies. Have you pivoted to anything else, or what else would the Spaulding model do well for?
Well, we opened as like the first paperless site in phase 1. So you had in 2008, when we opened, all hospitals were on EMR systems, but the phase 1 industry was still on paper. And so that was my dad's vision, was to make it electronic. And we did that, and we did it alone for 10 years. I mean, all of our competitors didn't come onto that until about 5 years ago. So, in the same vein, we're going to continue to innovate in our space. And we've used our knowledge of that to produce data results faster than anybody else. But I think the way that goes in the future, and even before the pandemic, it was looking at how do you take away all of the cost and time of phase 1 and all drug testing. How do you take away the brick and mortar from it and bring it into the participant's home? And then the pandemic just accelerated that question so much. And our goal or pivot in the future will be to continue to utilize our systems to bring it to the home. And for phase 1, that'll happen more quickly for late stage testing, where they're already doing a lot of at-home components. But for phase 1, I think like 5 to 7 years we'll need to be able to really, really convert to that. But for now, even just being able to do electronic diaries at home and things like that, data collection points at home, we're starting to introduce those things.
That's cool. So moving more, just like everybody else, moving everything into the home or more remote, which in your business, as you mentioned earlier in the podcast, has real challenges with data integrity. With did they have 5 cups of coffee, 2 whiskeys, and whatever, to mess with the bloodstream. So I'll be interested to see how you guys transition to that here in the future. I'm excited to see what that looks like. Okay. So last few questions, fast 4 here. These are not serious questions. They're just one sentence questions. So don't feel like you have to take too much time thinking about them. Just fun ones to finish with. Other than what you're doing right now, what other profession or business would you like to take a stab at?
Well, that's hard. I would say my immediate response, I thought you were going to say, would you have wanted to go into? I don't know if I could pivot it to this at this point in my career, but it was like movie directing and producing.
Yeah.
So it's a creative component. So I don't know. Maybe it's like creative involvement on TikTok at this point. That's how I kind of get my fill from that.
Yeah. I didn't. I need to reword that question because I do mean that. Like, most of us aren't going to pivot into this new phase, but like, what would be the thing that you would love? Like, I would like to start a business naming other companies. I love funny, gimmicky. I would love to just name people's companies or products. I think it would be a lot of fun. Next one is what is something you're terrible at?
I'm terrible at doing one thing at a time.
Yes. Mm-hmm. I love that. And I feel similar. I'm trying to get better at that because I do know the science behind it. That multitasking's a joke, but my brain just wants to do that all the time. All right. What book are you reading right now? Or what was the last book if you're not reading one right now?
I just finished Sacred Knowledge.
Sacred Knowledge. What is that about?
Yeah. It's a guy who went to a Jesuit high school, and he's like one of the last Greek class like a PhD in the classics. And he's like my age, he's our age now, and he did like this Eat, Pray, Love kind of thing where he went to, or even Da Vinci Code, he went to Greece, Jerusalem and Rome to look for to see if he could debunk there was this theory out there in the 70s that there was psilocybin in the original Eucharist in the Catholic Church.
Okay.
So he went and studied all of that, and it was really interesting. Very good. I don't think he ever made a case definitively in the end, but it's super interesting read.
So that is such a selfish question. So add it to my list.
Yeah,
okay, for sure. Good. On my list. All right. Lastly, what's the last, and if you have to look at your phone, you can, what's the last thing you listened to on Spotify or Apple Music? Mine today was the Smart List podcast with, they interviewed Ben Stiller.
I listened to Despacito with my kids on the way to school this morning.
There you go. That's a good way to start. Hey, that's a good way to start a Monday, if you ask me.
Oh, yeah.
That's the way
my
to go.
8-year-old was like whining about something in the back, and I was like, I need to turn on some upbeat music right now. And it worked. She was like in a good mood by the time she got to school.
There's a genius mom right there. Well, Cassie, thanks you for spending some time with us today. This has been super fun and educational. Where can people find you, or whether it's on your TikTok or find Spaulding Clinical? Where can they find you online and get in touch, if anywhere?
SpauldingClinical.com, and I'm on LinkedIn under Cassandra Erato.
Awesome. We'll put that all in the show notes. Thanks for spending some time with us today. Take care.
All right. Thank you.